Okay, so you know how we like to get right into the good stuff here on the deep dive.
Right to it.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into something that you might think you know, but it's a lot more than you think.
Definitely a lot more to uncover.
Yeah, we're talking about alcohol and how it affects your body.
Impacts the whole system, really.
Yeah, and we're going way beyond just the liver, which everyone always talks about, and really kind of peeling back all the layers.
Peeling back the layers, I like that.
And we've got some fascinating research to guide us today from a book actually called New Research Reveals the Effects of Alcohol on the Entire Digestive System.
Catchy title.
Yeah, by Shia and He Publishing, Inc.
Okay.
And they pull a lot from a super in-depth review in the Journal of Translational Gastroenterology.
Excellent source.
So, are you ready to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so we all know the liver is kind of like the main processing center for alcohol in the body.
Right. It does the heavy lifting. About 90% of the alcohol you drink ends up there.
90%? Wow. So what exactly is happening in there? I mean, how does it actually break down the alcohol?
So it's a multi-step process, and it all starts with enzymes.
Right.
The first step is the ethanol in your drink, that's the type of alcohol, gets converted into something called acetaldehyde.
Acetaldehyde.
Yeah, and that conversion is done by an enzyme, alcohol dehydrogenase, or ADH for short.
OVH, got it.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. That initial buzz you get, you know that feeling?
Yeah.
Well, it's partly due to this acetaldehyde. And get this, your body actually sees it as a toxin.
A toxin.
Yeah, not something you want hanging around for too long.
So what happens to it? Does the liver just, get rid of it?
It tries to, as quickly as possible. So the liver has this next step ready to go. The acetaldehyde is rapidly converted into acetate.
Acetate?
Yeah, and acetate is much less harmful, thankfully. And then from there, it gets broken down even further into simple things like carbon dioxide and water.
Which our bodies can just, get rid of easily.
Exactly, flush it right out.
But you said acetaldehyde is toxic. So even if it's only there for a short time, how does that actually damage the liver?
That's the thing. Even in small amounts, even for a short time, it can still cause harm to those liver cells. And over time, especially if someone drinks regularly, that repeated exposure can lead to a whole cascade of problems.
Like what?
Well, it often starts with what we call fatty liver. This is where fat starts to accumulate in the liver.
Okay.
And if the drinking continues, that can progress to inflammation. We call that steatohepatitis or sometimes alcoholic hepatitis.
And it can get even worse than that, right?
It can. If that inflammation isn't addressed, it can lead to scarring, which we call fibrosis.
Fibrosis.
And if the fibrosis continues, it can eventually develop into cirrhosis.
Oh, yeah. Cirrhosis.
Yeah.
We hear about that one a lot.
It's a serious condition, often irreversible,
Yeah.
where the healthy tissue is replaced by scar tissue. And really, tragically, long-term alcohol use is also a major risk factor for liver cancer, specifically a type called hepatocellular carcinoma.
Wow. That's a lot to process. And does this damage, does it happen quickly?
It really varies. It depends on a lot of factors like genetics, how much and how often someone drinks, and even the types of alcohol they prefer.
So some people are just more susceptible to damage than others.
That's right. And one thing the research really highlights is that women are often more vulnerable to alcohol-related liver damage.
More than men?
Yes, even when they drink similar amounts. It's not just a small difference. It's significant.
So why is that?
It's not fully understood, but it might have to do with differences in how men and women metabolize alcohol, or maybe even body composition plays a role.
So it's not a level playing field at all. Okay, so we've seen how the liver takes a hit, but like we said at the beginning, this isn't just a liver story.
It's a whole body story.
So where does the rest of the digestive system come in?
Well, think about it. Your GI tract is the first point of contact for the alcohol. Before it even reaches the liver, it's interacting with the lining of your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, the whole way down. So in a lot of ways, the GI tract shows the earliest signs of alcohol-related harm.
What kind of harm are we talking about specifically? Let's start at the top with the mouth and esophagus.
All right, so in the mouth, alcohol can contribute to something called stomatitis, which is basically inflammation of the lining of the mouth.
Ouch.
Yeah, not fun. It can also contribute to periodontal disease, which affects the gums and the structures that support your teeth, and even the bacteria that live in your mouth. That whole microbiome can be disrupted by alcohol.
Wow, so it's really messing with things right from the start.
Yeah.
What about the esophagus?
Well, alcohol can irritate the lining of the esophagus, leading to inflammation. That's called esophagitis.
Esophagitis.
It can also increase the likelihood of GERD, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease, heartburn.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely heard of that.
It's very common. And unfortunately, alcohol consumption is linked to a higher risk of esophageal cancer. And that risk is dramatically increased if someone is also a smoker.
So smoking and drinking, really bad combination.
Absolutely, a dangerous mix.
Okay, so the alcohol's having a pretty rough journey so far. What happens when it reaches the stomach?
Well, the stomach has to deal with its share of problems too. Alcohol can interfere with something called gastric motility. That means the muscles of the stomach might not contract as well as they should to move food along.
Okay.
And it can damage the lining of the stomach, that protective mucosal lining.
Mucosal lining.
Yeah, it's there to protect the stomach from its own acid. But alcohol can erode it, leading to gastritis.
Gastritis.
Basically, inflammation of the stomach lining. It can even cause ulcers, those painful sores.
Ouch, yeah.
And over the long term, chronic exposure to alcohol can increase the risk of stomach cancer.
So it's really messing with the stomach's ability to function normally. Now, the research mentions something called leaky gut, and that just sounds kind of scary.
It is a bit concerning. Essentially, long-term alcohol use can weaken the barrier of the intestines. Think of the gut lining like a net, meant to carefully control what gets into your bloodstream. Alcohol can create tears in that net, allowing larger substances to pass through that shouldn't.
That doesn't sound good at all. What happens when that leaky gut situation develops?
Well, it can lead to something called dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the bacteria that live in your gut. Basically, the bad bacteria can start to outnumber the good bacteria. It can also lead to problems with nutrient absorption. Your body might not be able to absorb all the vitamins and minerals it needs.
I see.
And that weakened barrier, combined with the changes in gut bacteria, can make someone more prone to diarrhea. And it's even been implicated in the development of colorectal cancer.
Wow, so from the mouth all the way down to the intestines, alcohol seems to be causing a lot of trouble. Let's move on to another organ that's crucial for digestion, the pancreas. Alcohol is often associated with problems there too, right?
Absolutely. Alcohol misuse is actually one of the leading causes of pancreatitis, which is inflammation of the pancreas.
Pancreatitis.
This can happen in a couple of different ways. It can be acute pancreatitis, which is a sudden and often very severe episode of inflammation and damage. Or it can be chronic pancreatitis, which is ongoing inflammation that leads to scarring, and eventually the pancreas might not be able to produce enough digestive enzymes.
What's actually happening in the pancreas when alcohol causes this damage?
It's complicated, and scientists are still working out all the details, but we know that alcohol can have a direct toxic effect on the cells of the pancreas.
Okay.
It can also trigger inflammation indirectly, setting off a chain reaction that ultimately causes harm.
So it's a combination of direct and indirect effects.
Right. And just like with other parts of the digestive system, there's an increased risk of cancer associated with long-term heavy alcohol use.
Pancreatic cancer.
Yes, and just like with esophageal cancer, the risk is much higher if someone is also a smoker. It really highlights how unhealthy habits can compound and have devastating consequences.
So we've covered the liver, the GI tract, the pancreas. What about the gallbladder? The research mentioned something about gallstones and inflammation there as well.
You're right. Alcohol can cause problems in the gallbladder, too. It's been linked to an increased risk of gallstones.
How does that happen?
Well, we think alcohol can change the composition of bile. Bile is that fluid produced by the liver that helps digest fats, and it's stored in the gallbladder. When the composition of bile is altered, gallstones are more likely to form.
And what about inflammation in the gallbladder?
That can happen too. Chronic alcohol use can contribute to cholecystitis, which is inflammation of the gallbladder.
Cholecystitis.
And if someone already has gallbladder problems, alcohol can make them worse by increasing something called oxidative stress.
Oxidative stress.
You can think of it like a kind of resting process that happens inside cells. And alcohol can also promote the release of inflammatory signals in the body. So it's really a multi-pronged attack.
Wow, it's amazing how many different ways alcohol can disrupt the digestive system. And one of the biggest takeaways here seems to be the increased risk of various cancers. Can we talk a bit more about that?
Absolutely. It's a very important point. As we've seen, alcohol is a major risk factor for cancers all along the GI tract, particularly the esophagus, stomach, and colon.
And that acetaldehyde, that toxic byproduct we talked about earlier, it plays a key role in this, doesn't it?
Yes, it's a potent carcinogen. It can damage your DNA directly, interfere with DNA repair processes, and even shorten telomeres, those protective caps at the ends of your chromosomes.
And all of that can contribute to the development of cancer.
Precisely. And you mentioned earlier how smoking and drinking together is especially dangerous for esophageal cancer. Well, the research shows that the combination of alcohol and smoking is also incredibly risky for stomach cancer. It's not just an additive effect, it's synergistic, meaning the combined risk is much greater than the sum of the individual risks.
And what about colorectal cancer? Is there a connection there too?
Yes, studies have shown a link between alcohol consumption and an increased risk of colorectal cancer. It seems to be related to a process called DNA methylation, which can affect how your genes are expressed and contribute to cancer development.
It's really sobering to consider the wide range of potential harm alcohol can cause throughout the digestive system. So what are the key things people should keep in mind in terms of preventing this damage? And what steps can they take?
Well, I think the most important message is that regular alcohol use has far-reaching consequences. It impacts every part of your digestive system, from your mouth to your colon.
So it's not just about protecting your liver.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the extent of the damage isn't the same for everyone. It depends on how much and how often someone drinks, their genes, and other lifestyle factors like smoking.
It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right. And we also need to be mindful of how alcohol interacts with medications. Sometimes these interactions can be worse for women.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that acetaldehyde and something called endotoxemia are particularly harmful for the liver. Can you quickly explain what endotoxemia is?
Sure. We talked about how acetaldehyde has direct toxic effects on liver cells. Well, endotoxemia is a condition where toxins from bacteria in the gut, called endotoxins, leak into the bloodstream.
Because of that leaky gut situation we discussed.
Exactly. And these endotoxins can further fuel inflammation in the liver, contributing to the progression of liver disease. So it's kind of a double whammy.
So given all this potential for harm, what's the most crucial message for our listeners?
I think it's about being proactive. It's so important to be aware of any digestive issues that might be linked to alcohol and to get them checked out early. Addressing these problems early can help prevent more serious conditions like pancreatitis, cirrhosis, and even cancer.
So early detection is key.
Absolutely. And of course, minimizing alcohol intake is the most effective way to protect your digestive health. What's generally considered a safe amount, often referred to as social drinking, is up to 1 drink per day for women and up to 2 drinks per day for men.
And for people who might be struggling with their alcohol consumption, what advice would you give them?
It's so important to seek help. Alcohol use disorder is a serious condition, but there are effective treatments available. There are resources and support systems out there to help people reduce or stop drinking, which can dramatically reduce the risk of all these digestive problems.
So don't hesitate to reach out for help.
Exactly. And finally, if you're experiencing any persistent digestive symptoms that you think might be related to alcohol, don't ignore them. See a doctor and get checked out. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. I think we've all learned a lot about how alcohol impacts the digestive system. It's clearly not just a liver issue, it's a whole body issue.
I agree. We've seen how alcohol can affect everything from the mouth and esophagus down through the stomach and intestines and even the pancreas and gallbladder. And then there's the increased risk of cancer, which is a huge concern.
It's all interconnected. So here's something for our listeners to think about. Given how intricately connected our digestive system is, as we've seen today, what other seemingly unrelated health problems might actually be linked to our lifestyle choices?
That's a great question.
It really makes you think about how your body is this incredibly complex ecosystem and how even small changes can have ripple effect throughout the entire system.
It's definitely something to consider.
Food for thought. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. I hope everyone learned something new and valuable today.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious.